Joining us now, Democratic Senator Michael Bennet of Colorado. Senator Bennet recently returned from Ukraine, where he met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. He went with 5 other Democrats. You saw my brother along the way.
I did.
I hope you said hi.
We saw him in Poland.
Exactly.
On our way over to Ukraine.
That's the gateway. So, I mean, especially after talking to President Zelensky himself, you hear President Biden trying on the national stage here to educate Americans, how about the word remind Americans about the power of the NATO partnership, the importance of American influence, the influence of democracy around the world. And yet we're in this fight right now with Republicans that could literally have more and more Ukrainians dying every day that goes by right now because they are withholding aid. How do we compel them to perhaps see the power of the partnership?
Well, not to date us, but I don't think of us as ancient people.
Well, we're pretty ancient.
We grew up.
I'm feeling ancient.
I don't think of you as ancient.
Okay.
But we grew up at a time in American history when Republican and Democratic presidents knew what their job was with respect to NATO and with respect to the transatlantic alliance and with respect to the Cold War.
I want to say voters even understood
Voters understood it. And when a Republican got elected or a Democrat got elected, one thing you could be sure of is they would prosecute the Cold War in a way that was going to benefit the American people. And in the end, it was a Republican president, Ronald Reagan, who stood up there and said, tear down this wall. And the East Germans took him up on it, and they literally tore it down brick by brick by their bare hands. The Ukrainians have fought Putin off with their bare hands from the start of this war.
And with their lives.
With their lives, and they have done more than anybody could have asked them to do. They've taken back half the territory Putin stole from them. They've won battle after battle after battle. They threw Putin out of the Black Sea, and they have no navy of their own. This is a nation of MacGyvers who have fought not just for Ukraine, but for democracy and for the West. And again, they couldn't, it'd be one thing if they had somehow failed.
Right.
But they have exceeded anyone's reasonable expectations.
They have overperformed, and to repeat, because it's worth repeating, they're not doing this just for themselves. They're doing this for the safety of the world. And Caddy, NATO expanding, bringing in new countries now. This should be, honestly, one of Biden's most incredible accomplishments, being able to unify NATO, help it expand, and reinforce the bond that the partnership has and what it means and what it does. And we're debating pennies going to Israel and Ukraine that are desperately needed.
This is the deal of the century for the United States. Less than 5% of America's defense budget and not a single American soldier being killed. And a country is damaging Russia all in the process to do it. But that argument either hasn't been made effectively or doesn't seem to be resonating. So let's talk about the ramifications for global security if America does not send this next aid package to Ukraine. What does it mean, not just in terms of Europe, but I could see the ramifications stretching to countries like Japan, which may decide, hey, America's not actually that reliable a nuclear umbrella for us. It's got holes in it. We're going to have our own nuclear capabilities if we can't depend on the United States. Where do you see the ramifications spreading?
Look at Japan. Japan just committed another $4.5 billion. Tokyo is a long way from Kyiv. But they see what the implications are for the rest of the world because they know this is, in many ways, a lot of this is about what Xi Jinping is thinking about Taiwan and whether or not democracies around the world can come together and stand up against tyranny, as we have in the case of Ukraine, because people living in free countries all over the world have been inspired by the Ukrainian people's courage and their bravery and their willingness to die for democracy. If we walk away under those circumstances, what kind of message is Xi Jinping going to take? What kind of message is Vladimir Putin going to take as he rolls over Ukraine? That's not going to be on the Ukrainian people. That will be on this dysfunctional Congress. And by the way, Putin thinks he could lose on the battlefield in Ukraine. The battlefield he's counting on winning on is the battlefield of our dysfunctional politics, the battlefield of our division, the battlefield of politicians. You said this is hard to sell to people. The battlefield of politicians who couldn't vote enough times to send $4 trillion to fight 2 wars in the Middle East for 20 years with a very uncertain outcome, and can't somehow support the Ukrainian people in this battle when we don't even have people, having to die for democracy, as the Ukrainians do.
Mika, you said that it used to be the American people. You could count on the American people to be concerned about Russia, and they still are. This is the thing that makes me hopeful that this will eventually get done. Is that over 70% in the polls, over 70% of American people support support the Ukrainians, support the U.S. giving more funding to Ukraine. You had a big bipartisan vote in the Senate. Were the Republican senators motivated by, is public opinion part of this? Do you think that can help push us over the edge to get this done in the House, or the Republican senators just motivated by the need to get this done because it's in everyone's interest?
It's such an important point. First of all, that is where the American people are, notwithstanding all the nonsense that's gone on here about it. And we got 22 Republican votes in the Senate. We had 70 votes overall. You can't get 70 votes in the Senate for anything hard, but we did for this because I think they know this is the outer edge of whether or not we're going to be able to demonstrate that our democracy still functions, that Putin's wrong, that Xi Jinping is wrong, that Zelensky is right in what he's doing. We are reaching the outer edge. And by the way, Jennifer, your point on the American people, I think, is so important because that's true on a host of things. They'd like us to have an education system where our kids could actually learn to read and do mathematics instead of falling behind. They'd like us to have background checks on guns, to have a health care system that wasn't bankrupting people, to have a system of abortion that wasn't turning women into second-class citizens, to not have a bunch of knuckleheads up here spend their time deciding whether or not they can keep the government open for one more week. Can you imagine if Winston Churchill took this approach in World War II, the one that we're seeing here? Excuse-making after excuse-making after excuse-making, instead of doing what the American people are saying, which is defend these people who have defended us and who have defended democracy.
The knuckleheads are working for Putin directly through Trump, helping him against Ukraine, which, we haven't even mentioned Alexei Navalny. And the fact that he has been murdered by Vladimir Putin. Jonathan Lemire. And they, I think, finally handed his body over. There is a funeral planned. There are people being arrested for putting flowers out in memory of Alexei Navalny. This is the guy that they're working for, and they are working for him. Connect the dots, people. You are helping Vladimir Putin as your members of Congress, withhold aid from Ukraine. Do you have a question for the senator?
Certainly, Dumika, and you're right. Navalny's mother has said the body has been handed over there after some back and forth with prison officials as to whether that would be allowed. And Senator, I wanted to ask you about that, focusing on the Russia piece of this. There is a sense that Putin right now has some momentum. Navalny is dead. The Russian military has gotten some wins on the battlefield of late. As you guys have been discussing, the Ukraine aid package has been held up there by Republicans on Capitol Hill. What is your concern level just about the wind at Putin's back? What could be next for him if the U.S. doesn't step up?
Well, as I said, I think he's counting on our dysfunction, and the fact that he killed Navalny while the leaders of the world were in Munich talking about what we had to do with Ukraine, that's not an accident. That's a complete FU to the United States and to the West because he thinks he's winning. And when we saw Zelensky last week in Lviv, he was very clear about this. He said, if you support us, we will win. If you fail to support us, we will lose. Putin knows how to read our newspapers. In fact, he's infecting our social media with propaganda every single day. The question is, are we going to stand up, as Jennifer said, for the 70% of the American people who are saying, we understand what our responsibilities are, what our obligations are. We understand that Ukraine has earned this, but more important than that, we understand that our national security depends on our getting this right. And over the next 10 days, that's what we're going to decide here in Washington, whether we're going to be able to stand up the way our parents and grandparents did, and whether we're going to be able to provide a role for America in this world that our children and our grandchildren can rely on. That is what's at stake.
Thank you. Democratic member of the Intelligence Committee, Senator Michael Bennet. Thank you so much for coming in today. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
All right.